a man to his family can, unless tempered by some wider loyalty, become the springboard for dangerous social chaos. We tend to think, I know the Chinese people think that you build your culture by having strong, scholarly, well-read, and educated individuals, but they then come together in families, and the family then becomes the foundation for a stronger network of communities, and the communities together then make a nation. But here, if you just get stuck on a family, you end up finding yourself in a kind of form of tribalism in a way, where your family supersedes all else, and you're unable to make a wider world, a common good that might transcend family. Skipping ahead to 147. This is where that community morale comes up. 147, the middle of the page. Community morale is a vague, irrational matter of atmosphere and moral tone, not a matter of logic. It would seem that once a basic moral standard is flouted in one area, it is difficult for standards to be upheld in some other area. It brings about a tone of unlawfulness. And that the problem with stealing is that it led to a relaxation of a lot of other things. In some ways, it reminds me of a discussion that's happening right now, and I probably shouldn't jump ahead to this, but I am going to interject it now. It's in my mind. Right now, there are people that are saying our president hasn't yet accepted the fact that he has not been reelected, but someone else will be president in January. And he has done some things that are, if he weren't president, he would be long since be brought to trial in a court. The question is, do we let this go or do we punish him? We had a previous president, Ford, that when Nixon was impeached, or impeached, but he left, I think, before they could actually follow through with the actual next step. Ford was granted, well, a pardon. And what would happen if we granted a pardon to our current president? And what if we don't grant a pardon to our current president? It's a dilemma that our country is facing right now. If we don't grant a pardon, then we risk riling up a lot of negative, violent forces. If we do pardon him, we in effect say goodbye to our democracy, because we do not believe and put in practice that no one is above the law. So this is a conundrum that our country is struggling with right now.
Yeah. One of the factors, though, to consider, Judy, is there's almost the better of both worlds, in that he can be pardoned for federal offenses, but not for state offenses.
That's right. There's jurisdictions
so
that
the Southern District of New York is just waiting in the edges. So
it may be, it's not an either or here. There are more complexities that will intervene, and this will play out in ways that are complicated, let's say, complicated, and may take some time. Good observation, Ann. Any other comments about this?
So he could be pardoned, which would make the Trump supporters happy, but still end up prosecuted.
That's a nice both and kind of solution. I think that that could happen. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Sue?
And those other offenses all happened before he became president. So it wouldn't be anything doing to his presidential conduct. It would have been to his tax evasion and other problems that he's dealt with over the years. So it's prior to the 4 years in his presidency. So I think that would help too. With
unless there's some statute of limitations thing that would help him out. I don't know.
Well, I think they're doing it right now. So I don't think that, I think it's prosecuting, because they're doable. Prosecutors in New York, a woman and a man. And I think that will happen. But I had another reading here that I really like. It's on 162, and it says, my thoughts seem to have run to a strange dilemma. I concluded ruefully a few days later, two things that apparently contradicted each other had become transparently clear in this experience. First, I had learned that men need to be moral, that is, responsibly concerned with their neighbor's welfare as well as their own, if human community was to be at all possible. Equally evident, however, men did not, or even could not, overcome their own self-concern to be thus responsible for their neighbor. So to live in community, you need to feel responsible for your neighbor, but many people, once things got tough, only thought of themselves and could not think of their neighbor. And that made living in community really, really difficult. And I said, how was such a dilemma possible? And above all, how could it be resolved? And it's the truth to both sides of the paradox. Perhaps then human life is itself a dilemma, in some strange but actual contradiction to itself, and unable in its own terms to overcome the contradiction. In that case, attempting to smooth out the contradiction in thought will only result in falsifying the reality that we're describing.
Excellent, excellent.
Sort of a broad generalization, the second half where men did not or could not so overcome their own self-concern. That's a little broad. I'm not sure I totally agree with that.
Well, it seemed like when they had the choice of giving up something in terms of housing or something so that someone else could benefit, it was very difficult for these people. And I think I see that a lot of times, that when you have a conflict over something of land use or whatever, each person is really invested in their own whatever and trying to resolve that. So it's
I guess our situation with the election sort of supports that, doesn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, I thought there'd be a lot more people standing up to Trump. I'm floored by that. So.
I think that the mention of the absolute need to consider the neighbor illustrates a difference between our situation, our political situation, and that of the compound, and that there could be another solution to another way this could play out, and that Trump may realize the very precarious legal situation he's in, even if he has a pardon, and may choose to flee the country. He has insinuated that, maybe jokingly, but he does have some people who might be able to hide him somewhere, and that, in essence, would relieve us of the internal tension of deciding one way or another on his fate. And they didn't have that luxury in a compound of fleeing prosecution.
That's right. If Trump would flee, though, I think that I can't imagine him not wanting the affirmation that he gets from all of his tweets. He'd probably find a safe place, but he'd still be sending out tweets. And
right.
There's rumors too that he would want to have his own radio TV network so that he can continue to campaign for 2024. The difference between morality and legalism is something that comes up, and I want to turn to where that's discussed. That's a turn to about 186 in your books. Starting about the third line on that page, or fourth. In this way, those of the legalist mentality would sooner attend to the White Citizens Council than be seen in a bar. They would think it better to be involved in an aggressive war than in a game of cards. They would rather be caught underpaying their help than be heard to swear. To hear the clergy of this persuasion preach, one would gather that in a segregated, militaristic, and in many respects economically unjust American society, they have come close to bringing in utopia when they have succeeded in barring the legal sale of liquor. I learned from this experience that the fault of this Protestant ethic was not that these legalistic missionaries were too moral. Rather, it was many of them were not free of their law to be moral enough. Their legalism prevented them from being as creative as the sincerity of their faith should have made them. Then skipping down a few lines, Protestants, let's see, I was thinking of what I felt especially weak in these Protestants was that their false standard of religious and ethical judgment that frustrated their own desire to function morally within the community. For this standard judged the self and others by criteria which were both arbitrary and irrelevant. In the end, it left the self feeling righteous and smug when the real and deadly moral issues of camp life had not been even raised, much less resolved. He was dealing with Protestants, and he's a Protestant himself, although he's not a Protestant of the legalistic flavor. And he had a problem with, we talked about it last time too, about the man that said that he wasn't going to give of his wealth or share it with anybody, because in order to do that and be true to his faith, he needed to do it willingly. God loves a cheerful giver, and he couldn't be a cheerful giver, and so he wouldn't give it all. Such a rationalization for his so-called morality, but that's definitely what I think that Gilkey would label as legalism rather than morality. And I think it's a really good distinction to make, because I know I grew up in a kind of legalistic mindset. And I remember when I was probably 12 or 13, I was hoping that our minister would preach more sermons against smoking, because I didn't smoke. That would make me feel good. And I think a lot of that, you can extrapolate it can cover a multitude of so-called sins. And I kind of think that behind a lot of people's animosity to people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, I think a lot of the animosity in some of our congregations against that community is because they don't know anybody who are in that community, and they would not consider themselves to be even close to any of that community. And so they feel free then to condemn and demonize something that they don't recognize, and they don't see a direct common humanity with them.
Mhm.
I attended within the past week a service of remembrance for 37, just this past year, 37, often people of color, transgender people murdered, 37 murdered so far this year in this country. And in other countries, it goes into the hundreds. And people feel free to somehow demonize the other, someone who they can't quite associate with, and feel free to include as God's children among them.
I think
You want to bring up about so-called legalism, Phil? You're about to say something?
I think it's important to point out that there are some people who do have a family member who is gay or lesbian, or a transgendered member of their family, and still take a negative stance toward that lifestyle. At the same time, I think your point holds, and the paragraph you point to, I hadn't seen it before, but I think that it perfectly describes our situation, or it helps me answer this question of how so many very Christian people were able to follow a confirmed liar and immoral person, uncouth person, and somebody who contradicted the way of Jesus in so many ways. It's that focus on, in our situation, just a couple of legalistic issues. I don't know what it was in Germany's situation when the church followed in with Hitler's agenda, but I think today It is that focus on sins that are basically out there in somebody else. Those are the logs in our eyes that
Well, and
allow us to overlook all of these other very critical moral factors.
I think going hand in hand with this emphasis on personal sins, that is, say, gambling or drinking excessively, other things like that, and like maybe even addiction to pornography. Those are personal sins, and there are a lot of people that wants to limit morality to just personal things, and in so doing, they totally ignore systemic evils such as racism, sexism, and ignoring people who are poor, for example. And that I think is a problem of kind of making a too narrow distinction about what your morality can include. And most religions, I think, have as part of their statements that they're acting toward one another, that do unto others as you would have them do to you. I think that is a statement that rings true in a lot of different religious expressions, and it transcends just a particular segment of Christianity or whatever. And I think the reason that Gilkey focused on morality, the word morality, rather than say
Ethics.
Maybe morality is something that all humanities can share. I mean, it's not restricted to any particular religion. He's not really talking about religion at this point, but he is saying toward the end, we'll probably get to it, that in order for morality to work, in order for that to have some reinforcement other than a notion of punishment, which, that's really a bad motive to do something because you fear punishment. That's kind of low on the standard of what I passed out early on for the first day about Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Doing something wrong to avoid punishment is one of the weakest motives for doing anything. But more important, I think, is to do it on the principle that this is something that you do in order to build community, to somehow to do something that supports the common good. And just refraining from drinking may not in the long run do something to support the common good. Sue?
Well, I just think there's an example about the teenagers that got involved in some sexual activity.
Yeah,
And
let's talk about that.
Yeah,
Why did that happen, and how did it occur? Who noticed it, and what did they try to do to fix it?
Well,
Go ahead.
first the parents all just told their teenagers to just go out and entertain themselves and whatever, and then they ended up going to one of these persons' rooms with 3 beds, and the woman in charge, the other kids scattered anyway. They got to do some sexual experimentation there, and when it finally came up, then some of the Christian missionaries introduced some game nights and stuff, and then the people say, well, too much, too late, and it's horrible, we can't do this, and parents are outraged. And then this Eric Ridley got some things going, and the kids really, got games and other kinds of things, activities and dances and chessboards, and built a model boat and all kinds of things. So he really got the kids engaged in something. You just can't tell them not to do something, but it's nice to have an alternative activity that's just as interesting. And so he said he was really the angel of the camp, because he knew how to relate to these kids and got them having diverted into something else, and made it work. And said he had been a track in the 440 in the Olympics for England in the 20s. And anyway.
Right, that name, it's Ridley, and it's really the real person's name, I think, was Eric Liddell. It's
Right.
It referred to in
Liddell.
the David Myers article. I got that in front of me now. I'm trying to put my fingers on the name. Yeah, on the back page.
I think there's a movie about him too that I saw.
Yeah, Chariots of Fire came out in
Chariots of Fire,
1981. Yes,
So he
Chariots
was
of Fire.
in the same thing, and also really stepping up and doing something and not just complaining or blaming, but, all of a sudden an intervention that works. So it is possible. Sometimes you have to go against the stream, and sometimes it's slow and it takes a while, but he had perseverance, and often it sounded like he really was a wonderful guy, and helped these kids get into a little bit better activity. I didn't talk about any children being born in this detention camp, so hopefully that didn't happen. But anyway, I just thought that was.
I would think over that span of years, you might have among families that
well,
you might
among
have.
families, but I think
Yeah,
among
right. Oh,
teenagers,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Oh, yeah.
that would be a real disaster, I think.
That would have been
Mhm.
problematic. Yes. Right. Right.
So anyway, just talking about that. So anyway, I
Right.
guess that was a good example of how people can come forth and make a change and pull people together and make a difference. So.
Yeah, that leads me to introduce the characters and so on, about which character you identify with in here, and which one you least identify with, and one that you might have wished that you could have been in that other person's shoes. And when I was reading this on 164, there were two women that he talked about that really turned things around in the kitchen. One of them was a little bit more flamboyant than I could associate with. And 164, if you turn to that page, you'll get the details. But there was another one named Jane Bright. And I have really identified with her because, well, she was an intense, scholarly, devout Quaker in her late 40s. Well, I can't identify with late 40s. That puts me back several decades. But she had been a professor of history, and she had a firm jaw, a long stride. And she was, according to Gilkey on page 165, was a most remarkable woman I've ever had the good fortune to know. She worked with the women in the kitchen that had emotional ranges like Dostoevsky's Most Angry Women. And I identified with her as someone who was objective, balanced, had kindness, but had a tough hide and some strong will. So in describing her this way, I think we indirectly get from Gilkey some of the values that he sees as being important and helpful to building community. Any others of you identify with someone in here that you want to talk about?
No, because I realized it was against the rules. I realized too late that the author wasn't permissible. But there were a number of other characters that I thought were intriguingly positive. But I found myself envying his ability to be so reflective about these things. To have his discipline to journaling and his apparent his facility with writing. I mean, it's not a writing style that is all that popular today, but it can be very precise. And I just thought it was well stated. So I kind of identify with his teacher background. But it was an easier time for me to answer the negative question.
Oh, let's talk about the negative. Who is the most negative person in here that you would not want to be?
Well, anytime anybody showed some passive aggressiveness, I thought, oh, because I don't know about other people, but I sometimes sense that the seed of some passive aggressiveness in me. All right, my reaction to something is, oh, okay, I'm kind of control this, but disguising my control, and it just bothers me. So, and that showed up. The thing I think of mostly was the sugar, the couple involved in the sugar incident.
Oh yeah, I think that's one. Was that Witherspoon? Was it Witherspoon? Where does that happen? It's in the sugar chapter. I've got my page almost on my hand, almost on the page. Yes. 124. That's Mr. Witherspoon. And of course, the names, Bright, that gives it away. Witherspoon, and the name itself, it's almost like Dickens in naming his characters here. Even though they're based on true people, he invents names so that the true people don't get offended and take him to court over character assassination or whatever. But some of the description of Mrs. Witherspoon and the relationship to him.
Mhm.
Let's see, where do I want to start? On 124, this is the second full paragraph. The unintended founder of our kitchen's democracy and the heroine of the tale I'm about to relate was the weightier half of a most extraordinary couple, the Witherspoons. Mrs. Witherspoon's husband, a lawyer, was a small, seedy man with a tiny mustache. He describes a lot of his men by describing what their mustaches looked like. And he was apparently a born pilferer. It was well known in North China society that he had been ejected from the club for stealing soap. No old China hand would play cards or golf with him because the report ran, he invariably cheated. But the good lawyer, who fortunately had given up serious practice years before, was a frail reed, indeed, compared to his massive lady. The frail reed, it's an image I think is, I don't know, it's out of the Old Testament. And some of the prophets refer to human beings as being reed-like. And then here's her. She was heavily girdled, wallowing mastodon of a woman with white hair, a hard, strong face, and an even stronger will. Neighbors reported that her poor spouse was buffeted about like a canoe in a hurricane when she went after him. He would shoot out of the door of their small room, followed by a torrent of verbiage. Then puttering about in the still waters of the tiny garden at the end of the small plot, he would ease his harried soul by talking back to her under his breath while she bellowed at him from within. Rumor had it that she drove him to go on his petty pilfering raids, would threaten in stentorian tones not to let him in the door until if he came back empty-handed. In any case, it was true that he had been tried and convicted of several attempts to snatch from the kitchen more than the couple's rightful portion of food. Yeah, the henpecked husband, really unfortunate character in here. Any others want to mention something about one of the people that you think was aptly described? One of the people in Shandong compound. I do want to save some time at the end to talk about one of the women and the ladies, one of the church ladies. I want to talk about the church lady at the end, but I'll save that for the end. Any other things or characters that you want to bring up?
I was most appalled by the 7 Americans who resisted the idea of sharing all those boxes. I think it was 5 or 7.
The Red Cross
Yes.
boxes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mentioned that to more people in the days after I read that portion. Just I could not believe it.
Well,
I don't know what I'd do. I mean, but I don't know.
yeah, well, it just seems like when everyone could have 1 or 1.5, and then to take all 7 and watch everybody else be miserable. Yeah, excuse me, that's not good. Someone's at my door.
Okay. Oh.
And then I appreciated the South Africans then that followed right after, when the 2 of them got the 200 pairs of boots
That's right.
and said they were keeping them all and they would wear each pair for 3 days. And then after that, they would be happy to share them with anyone in need.
Right. A good parody of white privilege doing, sharing our used items with people in poverty in other countries after we've used them and refusing to give them as good a quality as what we buy for ourselves. Right. We're close to 155, and I want to read on 155 about the difficulty they have in trying to change people by just publicly shaming them. Talking about how impotent they were in trying to get some law and order. That evening, Matt and I talked over the problems of moral pressure as a basis for law. We make a great to-do about the force of public opinion, said Matt, but when the chips are down, a skittish and unreliable thing at best. It may light on some unfortunate with a surprising and unjust weight, and at the same time remain indifferent to a real menace. Society seems to disapprove with equal relish the genius and the criminal, the saint and the malingerer, and it will always express sympathy for the outlaw if the government happens to be unpopular. In other words, more often than not, society approves and disapproves of precisely the wrong people. 1,000 factors may divide and confuse public judgment, though through this maze of loopholes, the offender, like Willie, escapes and unscathed by a pressure too diffuse to touch them. Even more, Max, I put in, the Willies of the world can always find plenty of friends, those who are accustomed to the illegal, those who hate the government, those who are just plain like him. You know, I think the only place this moral pressure or moral force really works is where the government is immensely respected, where an absolutely unified public opinion can be created, where each member is so intimately related to the others and so dependent on them that disapproval really does hurt them. And I think we see, well, I'll keep reading. This works only in small and select groups, such as families and schools, corporations, and totalitarian states. Most of them, schools and corporations at least, are fooling themselves when they think no force but moral pressure is used, because the school can always use the coercion of expulsion if the moral pressure doesn't work. In a camp like this, where you can't expel anyone and where there's no unified public opinion that can hurt anyone, to count on moral pressure alone is hopeless. The real possibility with the concept of social order based on social pressure, moral pressure, is that it assumes that everyone is already moral. Look at the way that Willie laughed at those poor chaps who were judges. If their moral condemnation of Willie is to stick, they have to be clean themselves. And who hasn't been involved in some shadiness in this place? Anyway, what does moral condemnation mean to a man who doesn't care about being moral or even being thought moral? Will he change his tune because of it? Never. He couldn't care less. Without the threat of some sort of harm to the offender, without some form of force, no system of law is permitted in a world where universal morality cannot be assumed. And if it could, then after all, no system of law would really be necessary. So they had difficulty here in getting any people to buy into anything that would be punishment for wrongdoing. And so you lose your sense of moral order. And opposite page across the way, right in the middle of page 157, no group can legislate itself above its own moral level. Law and order won't come because men, won't come because men take on other jobs. They will only, law and order will come only if the community has a sense of responsibility to its own welfare. That is a sense of the common good. And elsewhere, he says at some point that you need to get something that would be above the common good, something that if you can get everyone to agree to a higher principle, call it God, call it religion, that might ensure a greater uniformity of values and build some consensus that could create a society that would be helpful and kind. Just my thoughts on this. Just reflecting back on all that we've read, Lord of the Flies, the article about the boys on Eta, and this itself, what do you conclude as ways to build community when you have these kinds of pressures working against you? And and this will lead into our own discussion about what can we do even in our own country right now with its polarization and with its threat to democracy. What can we do that would aid in building community? Comments from anyone? What have you learned from what you've read that might be applicable to today?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is not so much in our own community, but supporting the Central American countries so they can make their own countries safer by helping them with development and food, and helping them with the crime and the drug stuff. When people need to flee their own country, they come here. But if we can actually help them make their own homeland safe again, they'd prefer to stay. So we've cut all our funding off for Central America, and I'm hoping with a new administration that can come back so they can become more self-supporting. And it's like the rich women that he gave the talk to. They had all kinds of bonbons and chocolates and.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that. I want to read that later on for sure.
But
Go
anyway,
ahead though. Yeah.
Being generous to other places, just so that they can be independent. And it's, I like to think like the Heifer Project and lots of other things that give people things that they need so that they can actually grow and become independent themselves. So I think that, and then.
So that's like remove the sources of the problem by being more fair to the countries and supportive of them. And
Right.
the United Nations is one way that has helped in the past. Go ahead though.
In our own country, I was just listening to NPR right now and talking about in Alabama, they don't have sewer systems. People that live in house trailers, and that the toilets go right outside to the ground, and that's raw sewage. And you don't even think about it. They have a big problem with hookworm. So helping the least of us so that they have access to water and heat and sewage systems. And if you can as a family put in a sewer system. If you're in poverty, and even putting in a septic system. So helping the least of us in our own country and figuring out how we can do that, and not spend so much money on military, but spend more money on infrastructure and sewers and electricity and solar and all the rest of the stuff to save our earth and save the people. I don't know, and just more humanity for each other.
Okay.
Judy,
Yes.
a couple of thoughts. Well, and I agree with you, Sue, that the justice, like you're describing, economic and health justice, and these things help to reduce pressures on people who are disadvantaged, and pressures from those people that may disrupt others. But I don't think it addresses the issues of gaining some sort of common, sense of unity, or bringing together, like in the book, bringing together various ideas of various ideas of value structures, and I think leadership matters. We've seen that in recent years, and variously, and developing some kind of common project. Now, wars do that really well. Or that's a terrible project, but something that and coming out, thinking back to coming out of the Depression, or rebuilding after World War II, and these kinds of projects have tended to bring people together, and then on the other end, I mean, that's kind of from the top down. On the other end, just what in our personal relationships, family relationships, community relationships, where we can directly, personally involve ourselves to try to expand sort of a sense of togetherness, of unity of spirit, so that people don't feel like they're separate groups.
We have a political poll, like a polarity, let's say, that says that government is the problem, big government especially, and that we should employ churches and community volunteer organizations to improve the lives of people who are experiencing poverty.
Yeah, thank you.
Any thoughts about that?
Well, I do know.
Yes, I will.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
Go.
No, go, Phil.
Okay. I would take the opposite point of view, at least for the sake of conversation, perhaps more, that I think that we need a whole lot more government. I don't think that just leaving things to work themselves out have a good track record. I want to consider the possibility of taking some of the ideology, some of the politics out of government. Like we have some agencies and some people who are career diplomats, for example, or other, the negative term would be bureaucrats, but people keeping the thing working who are not as invested in a particular political party, people who have found it able to serve under different administrations. I have long held that the best thing we can do for our national government is to outlaw, suddenly overnight, outlaw both the Republican and Democratic parties. and see them.
I'm getting a nod from Gene on that.
Mhm, mhm.
It's just gotten to be a football game. You know, they're not working together well. I think that's very, very clear. And one of the notions, now just to take this at a radical step, but the issue of leadership has come up not only in Lord of the Flies, but Shantung province. You know, who do we get to play these roles? Someone has suggested a type of representation in government that is not based on elections. And I forget what they call it, but it's as if you treat service in the legislature as jury duty. Your name comes up, you know, and you are called upon. I see it important to base something on merit, but apparently places where they've tried this and to a limited degree have been very successful. So you're not there because you earned enough money to buy enough ads or join the right party, but you are there because you are called to do some civic duty. Find some way to take our ideology can be a factor, but it's gotten to a point where everything is controlled by ideology rather than that common good. You know, or that the other thing I'll throw in here is another book that could be considered here is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm hoping you can hear me without my putting my picture because I was noticing when I had both the mic and the camera on. But Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they discover, or the president of the galaxy, or maybe it's the universe. The president of the universe is someone who has no idea he's president of the universe. They have this puppet, they have this kind of a figurehead president who wants to be, but they have a common understanding that anybody who wants to be the ruler of the universe is ipso facto disqualified. So this little old man who lives alone with his cats on some abandoned planet is the actual ruler, and people come and they talk with him for a while. That's all he knows. They talk about issues, and those people then go back to the government and implement the wisdom that they gain from the conversation. I thought it was a unique concept that Douglas Adams came up with. So how we get our leaders, is there a way to divest that from the ideological battles we have? I tried to get it all in at once. Sorry if that was too much.
No, that's good. And I think early experiments by the Greek civilization, classical Greece, in their formation of democracy, did some of that. Had things that were sort of chosen by lottery, various offices, but they found that they couldn't keep that democracy. It turned into a tyranny. It's very hard to keep a democracy. Very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think some states in the United States, I don't know if it's Montana and maybe Arizona, are trying to get people that are not the super wealthy, but are just common people like a librarian or a nurse or whatever. And just I can't remember that's, it's a state election officials, but anyway, they've gone through a process where they're taking the money out of it, and it seems like that's working a lot better. And
No, I think if they could undo Citizens United and get that money out of political campaigns, it would do so
Yeah.
much to clean up the
Yeah.
corruption that we're
What a corrupt rule.
caught in.
Judy, when you popped out the notion that the belief that anything the government tries to do can't be good and government can't accomplish anything. When I hear that, I think, thank you, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah,
And,
that's the one who said it. You know,
yeah,
I'm here to
he
help
wrote-
you. That's
he wrote-
the worst words that people want to hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And
Yeah, he wrote-
he just vilified that. And
wrote that word.
he's taken populism or whatever to a bad turn.
well,
And
and you have to think about it. Every road we have, the post office we have, libraries we have, that's all part of
Yes.
government. And those are the
Mhm.
things that we enjoy in this country that are good for us. And to why identify that's all bad. And same thing with Social Security and Medicare. And I don't understand, because Medicare really works. Why the rest of the people feel that if Medicare for all would be such a horrible thing. Actually, it would take, we would probably have much more efficient healthcare and take a lot of the bureaucracy out of it. Anyway, but it's interesting. But once you label it as bad, and it really, you have to have some overreaching organization for 50 states to be able to function. So I don't know. Seems
Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, Medicare is by far the most efficient insurance program, medical insurance program that we have. And I was going to say that I would agree with you too, Phil. We need efficient government. I think we need more government. We need higher taxes to support that. We need to pay for what we get. But another question you raised, Judy, was the idea that the charity and private donations should support these things that people want to do with government. And I know that in Bread for the World's numbers are that all of the donated charitable funds for food delivery to people in need, at its top, can fulfill about 1/20, about 5% of the need. So it's just that approach. Certainly, it's valuable and it's good to be involved in that. But it's just a drop in the bucket in terms of addressing the needs.
Right.
Right. And you can't really just rely on voluntary contributions when people at heart, it seems to be, are very selfish and self-centered. A tax system that's fair, that's another whole topic.
Yeah.
Unfair
Yeah.
taxes.
And in
A tax
Michigan-
system that's fair is a helpful way to distribute funds and aid to people who are poor. Sue?
Well, in Michigan, they want to change the Michigan state tax now that people over 65 don't have to pay any federal, state, or any state taxes for anything under $50,000. Well, many of the young people here are working and they're earning 30 or 35,000 or 40,000. We're retired. If we're getting in over 50 or
Yeah.
at 50, we certainly should pay taxes. And Michigan state taxes are really pretty reasonable. I was just so annoyed with that. And I read that the other day. I thought there's a motion in the state legislature now to raise from 45,000 to 50,000. And that just denigrates all these hardworking younger people that are barely making it. And if we have an income of 45,000 and are retired, we're really doing quite well. So it was like, we sort of have got taxes backwards. And states
Exactly.
need to
Right.
have taxes. And my mother used to complain about taxes, and I would say, Mom, when you have to pay taxes, it means you're earning a lot of money. That's a good thing. So don't complain about it.
Yes.
Anyway.
Tia?
It is a little bit, though, more complicated than that, Sue. It actually, those amounts were not taxable under Michigan law until Rick Snyder, the governor, made it taxable in order to give breaks to business. And a portion of that is, of course, our Social Security, which we already paid tax on our contributions when we made them in the first place. So there is a reason to me why those amounts should not be taxable. And while it's true that a number of us may be at the $50,000 mark, there are an awful lot of other people who's are at more minimal levels who,
Well, no, the minimum, under 50,000, you don't have to pay.
right,
And so even under 45,000 is what the breakout now is. But think of the young people that you know that maybe is a teacher that's earning 35,000 and she's paying the same thing and we're not paying anything. So it's, I don't know. I feel like I feel like I should help support the roads in Michigan and other things that are here. And if I have that much money coming in, I'm willing to do it. So it's a push pull, but
Well, and it's not a question of whether we favor the retirees making 50,000 or people who are struggling along at 20,000 or 30,000. Everybody who's making less money should have less tax burden, and people who are making huge amounts of money need to pay a lot more.
right.
If we shift the burden, we should shift the burden away from all people who are struggling or at the edge.
Right. And not just the retirees, but as you say, all people who are up in the higher income ranges.
Right, and I think tax the transactions or whatever that are investment based. Bill and I made some decisions early on to save money and invest. And when I look at our quarterly reports lately and look at what I struggled to do when I was a student at Hope College trying to earn my way with a job working for a community newspaper just to pay my way through college, the money I paid for college is just something that is in my quarterly reports. Just by letting my money sit in these investments, it's making obscene gains. It's going to change, I know, at some point, but I feel that young people are denied this. They don't have the opportunity to invest money because they've got college debts to pay. And I think that our whole younger generation is really put in a bad position. If we could take some of the money that just is earning just exorbitant amounts because of the stock market bubble, if some of that could be taxed in such a way that we could pay some of these students' college bills, that would be a more equitable society for all generations.
When having capital gains taxes being a fraction, half or less than half of what earned income is taxed at,
right,
is like the people in Shantung who took all the boxes.
right.
Yeah,
Well, sure,
exactly.
because people that have not that many people have the investment. So we're getting the same thing with people with houses and the interest on it. A lot of people can't even afford to buy a house, so they don't get that tax advantage. So we have a lot of tax advantages for people that are wealthier and have money, and much less for people that are really poor and trying to make a go of it. So yeah, it is, you don't really think about the inequalities of it until you really look at it and you say, okay, the person living in an apartment never has the advantage of deducting their 7% interest payments, or at one point they were up to 10 or 15 or whatever. Those were all tax deductions. So yeah,
right. And the real estate industry has done very well in promoting that.
So anyway,
Done well for themselves, done not so well for the common good. I'm speaking ironically.
Yeah. Going back to the Judy, the whole question about what students are facing now with student loans, how the cost of colleges and universities has bludgeoned. My mom and dad put 4 of us through the University of Michigan and Michigan or Michigan State for pittance. They weren't wealthy. They had limited funds. We lived in a little 3-bedroom, 1-bath bungalow, but they put us, the percentage of my dad's income that went for our tuition was a pittance compared to what families are facing today. And it's forcing so many young people into this choice of having these huge debts. It's it's disheartening. I don't know, thinking back, I don't know what I would have done if I was faced with that sort of situation.
Well, I think even the harder part is now that they're graduating and there are no jobs for them to graduate into. Think of anybody that graduated this spring with all of the shutdowns. And
Mhm.
if they have to start paying back these loans, they're really in trouble. That's just really a difficult situation. It's,
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I have not heard in the discussion of the economy versus the virus talk and argumentation, I have not heard anyone making some dramatic appeals to people who are very, very well off. I mean, I hear a lot of, we must force these poor workers to sacrifice, to risk their health for the sake of keeping our economy going. But I don't hear anyone say, hey, there are people here who could give 85% of their wealth toward this problem without sacrificing their lifestyle at all.
Mhm.
Why are they free from sacrifice when we are asking workers to sacrifice for the sake of the economy?
And then the whole business of raising the minimum wage. Where did I read just recently? The biggest welfare recipient is the people that own Walmart. They are getting away with not paying their workers a living wage, and so the workers have to go on welfare while they have a full-time job working for Walmart. And you read that Walmart, the profitability and for the whole family is just obscenely bloated. It's because they've been extracting it from their own workers' paychecks in a way. Unfair.
Yeah.
I want to jump back to the book for just a bit. Their question came up in a discussion. This is on page 181. In a discussion of 6 people we're having about how should we treat the Japanese when victory was won. This was a somewhat academic issue for us as the prisoners, but still one fraught with intense feeling. Various people among them found themselves in general agreement, and they realized that the Japanese were hardly lovable at that point. They appeared to us cruel and aggressive. We felt that the militaristic and imperial elements of their culture would certainly have to be dealt with severely if we won. But as Bruce said, after all, they are human beings. That is, the Japanese are human beings, and we are by no means perfect. Really, the only thing to do is to try to forget this whole business and bring them back again into the world of civilized and peaceable nations as quickly as possible. I was impressed, but Baker violently disagreed with this view. He said, why? He said, they're all pagans there and filled with all kinds of immorality. In fact, they're hardly human at all. Look at the way they behave. No, I don't believe any responsibility to them. I don't feel any responsibility to them as brothers. If our world is to be ruled by righteousness, we must rid it of these unrighteous groups as best we can. There is no question but what we should crush them completely in order to weaken them permanently as a nation. If necessary, we ought to seriously consider depopulating the island. The rest of us stared wide-eyed, frankly horrified at this outburst. Bruce remarked sarcastically, well, Brother Baker, if that is what your God has said to you, I'm glad for the sake of my ruddy soul that he has never spoken to me.
But it almost sounds like the Germans when they were getting rid of all the Jewish people, and he wants to do the same thing, and I'm sure he thought that was an atrocity. So it's interesting. It's always the other, and that
right.
All people are human beings, and that it's interesting. It's and it's interesting. Hopefully, someone spoke up and had a counter argument there. It looks like they did. But they were talking about, some of the missionaries were saying that anybody that smoked or swore or whatever, they were damned to hell and there was no hope for them. And even though if they were the hardest worker, they were giving up a lot or taking care of the lesser of these, just because they burned their fingers and said hell or damn, they were lost souls.
That's
Which
right.
is
That's
such
right.
a judgmental kind of a regimented way of looking at life. It's interesting.
Let's see, for Baker, holiness had so thoroughly displaced love as the goal of Christian living that he could voice such a prejudiced and inhumane policy with no realization that he was in any way compromising the character of his Christian faith or his own moral principles. That was appalling. It is, again, that's that legalism, and that's an emphasis on holiness rather than love. And the emphasis on love is something that I think cancels out selfishness and much more effectively than the attempt to simply be holy. Let's go to the rescue. Any comments you want to make to the fact that the feelings of the camp, how they changed when they realized that they were about to be rescued? You want to just kind of summarize any reactions to the whole story about the rescue and the elements of the progress of that rescue? Any comments or summary you want to comment on that?
Well, it's kind of humorous way that things are dropping out of the sky.
Oh, yes. And he describes that so well.
They didn't get hit by them. I mean,
No casualties, but these things would just drop out of these huge planes that were coming by and rescued. And the Chinese people that, of course, were outside the camp, they were scrounging around for some of that too. But remarkably, they evaded being hit with that.
I love the one time when the internees had to lay down in the field and hopefully not get hit. One fellow said, well, he had survived all his time in the camp to be killed by a can of peaches.
Yeah.
Yep, I do remember that one.
Yeah, that's a great statement.
Yeah. I found one of the saddest parts was when the British official came and pointed out to the British citizens that basically that their former Chinese businesses were all destroyed and they were welcome to stay in China, but he was encouraging them to go back to Britain. And one said, well, he had never been there in his life. He knew no one there. So it was for many people, being repatriated, going back to their homes would be such a wonderful thing. But there were people who were just abandoned into the sea of, well, were they going to stay there in China, hopefully to find some sort of work, or were they going to go to where they had never been before and had no family?
Right. War displaces people. It's just inevitable. Yeah. Displacement. Yeah.
There were intensely emotional dimensions to both their entry to the camp and their departure that I could empathize with. I could not identify necessarily with the humiliation at the beginning, but I could recognize a powerful experience, having to be stripped of your status and all of your possessions and be treated as a prisoner almost. That walk through the town in humiliation to get to the trains, and then at the end, it's the gap between the end of the war, the departure of the Japanese, and then their actual being able to go home. They're just being there. They're stuck there. They know that they know what the end will be, but they can't leave. I can identify with, I was in a similar situation to that. That's a very horrible experience to have to go through.
You're in a status of limbo of some sort, and you don't really know what's coming, and you don't know how long it's going to change before it changes. I want to read this statement toward the end where he goes, he's back in the States and he's invited to tell his story. I'm going to start, I think, on page 226. The next morning at breakfast, the cartoon in the paper caught my eye. It was a time when the UNRRA, United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, was embarking on a program. People in Washington were beginning to talk about American aid to devastated countries. The talk that ultimately flowed to the Marshall Plan.
That's right.
Sensing that it was termed misguided do-goodism involved in these humanitarian schemes, the Chicago Tribune was already mounting its attack. The cartoon that morning pictured a benevolent but naive figure labeled Uncle Sucker, who was being milked of his possessions by wily and well-fed foreigners. The caption read, "Don't let them give away what is ours." He comes back to the United States and he finds out this time, and when he's reading the papers, he's going to find out when he goes to talk to the church ladies that the problem of deprivation is not just the selfishness is not just a problem of those who are deprived of things. It's selfishness is also symptomatic of people that have everything. He said, continuing my reading here on the top of 227, suddenly a bell rang in my mind. I heard the voice of Ricky Kolchak saying, "These are my parcels and no one's going to take a single one from me." And I felt at once more completely at home. Amid all our plenty, we in overstuffed America faced precisely the same crisis over which we had struggled with our 7 1/2 parcels in a starving camp. The level of material wealth at issue was vastly different, but the human problems remained identical, except that now the stakes were higher. Could we summon the moral strength as well as the wisdom and prudence to share our wealth with a now famished world, or would we hoard it to ourselves, stuffing ourselves with surfeit, but in so doing demolishing all hopes of achieving a humane and peaceful world community? With a sinking heart, I realized that nowhere could one escape these deeper issues of life. On every level, the same choice remains, for the same moral problem is posed to us. A week or so later, he was asked to speak about his experiences. The notion of the continuity of the moral problems through the variables of situations fascinated me. I built a speech around the subject, and I gave that talk about twice a week for the next 6 months at service clubs, women's clubs, schools, and churches around Chicago, in the Midwest generally, and later in Virginia and Tennessee. And the reactions illuminated the thesis of the speech and the theme. Let's see. The reactions illuminated the thesis of the speech and the themes of my thoughts concerning the human condition. Everyone was quite genuinely horrified on hearing the story of the Red Cross parcels. All found it hard to believe that Americans could have acted so selfishly, especially the 7 that changed the generous plan to something more selfish. But when the parallel was drawn and the similar choice that faced the audience as Americans in today's world was described, most persons in the audience would draw back. My listeners seemed to find the two situations quite dissimilar. They argued with me afterwards that whereas to share with one's fellows in a camp was a human necessity, to give those foreigners free food that belonged to us was immoral. One meeting at a women's church group especially fascinated me. We met in a mammoth suburban residence outside Chicago, the expansive driveway lined with black Cadillacs and Lincolns. This group contained some 40 middle-aged women, elegantly dressed and adorned. As I spoke to those smiling and gracious ladies in the living room, out of the corner of my eye, I could see 2 or 3 maids putting sandwiches, cookies, and towering chocolate cakes on the dining room table. I suppose I stressed the problems of hunger and the need for sharing even more than usual as my eye traveled from minks to gentle round faces, to chauffeurs pacing outside and then back to the cakes again. When I had finished, the president, whose face had worn a slight frown during the later course of my talk, called for questions. When none was proffered, she rose and addressed the following remarks to me. I think our visitor, for all these good intentions, does not understand our point of view on these matters. You see, we don't believe at all in the value of material things. It is the spiritual values of life
Oh,
that we feel are significant. We believe that what America has to offer the world is her spiritual superiority, not any advantage that she may have in the realm of mere material goods. Thus, we would like to encourage the export to Europe and the rest of the world of our great spiritual ideals, our religious faith, our sense of morality, and the value of the inner life. So we send moral and religious writings abroad and do not approve of concentrating on the things that are not so important to the welfare of the soul. This is why we do not support the UNRRA. We think it is the shame that more of the churches, which should represent the spiritual and not the material, do not share our views. If there are, then no more questions. Let us adjourn the meeting. I can see our hostess has provided us with tantalizing refreshments in the dining room. That's it. I can just picture that, Drew. He describes it so well. And this is what he returns to the United States, and this is what he contends with. And I would submit, this is the reason why he wrote the book. I think he wrote the book because this is not just a simple story of people living in deprived conditions in a camp. This describes the human condition. It's something that we all have to confront. Any other comments?
I'm in a women's group in Saugatuck, and we often go out for lunch. And what happens is some of the ladies, and these are very wealthy Lakeshore ladies that live right on the lake with huge houses and BMWs and Mercedes, blah, blah. So they get the special of the day, order a half sandwich and share it with someone else. Don't get a drink, but order water. And then when it comes to tipping, sometimes they're reluctant to put down even $1. And you don't realize that waitresses make about $3 an hour. So the ladies out for lunch, it just pains me to see this because they're not understanding the other at all. They could very equally buy an expensive lunch or whatever, but they've gotten it down, which is fine. But then they ought to be able to tip the server a little bit more to make up for all the money they've saved on getting the special and having a whatever. I don't know. So it's sort of that same thing. It's just not realizing the other person involved in the transaction and being pecuniary, I guess it is. I don't know. Anyway, it's one of those things that just kind of happens, and we it's sad. You know, we have a lot, but we don't really want to share very much. It's and that's and that's kind of an everyday happening. You can kind of see it happening, and it's like, okay, you know, generosity and is just something that I guess is difficult to do sometimes. I don't know.
Well, it's a part of our selfish nature, I think. And that brings me, I think, to the one last thing that I had sent you to read and think about, and that is David Meyer's article, Are We Humans Basically Good or Bad? And you know, I think it's if you've read the article, he explores both perspectives, that you know, maybe a Calvinist perspective that says that we are, because of original sin, innately evil and prone to no good. And then the other point of view, much more optimistic, that we are capable of being very good. And I think it's not an either or. You can't answer that question. He answers it by saying are humans basically good or bad, with a yes at the end. We are good. We have the capability of being good. And we are also bad and have the capability of being bad. And I guess I go back to the old story about, I think, an Indian Native American talking to a grandchild talks about the fact that you have, in effect, two wolves at your ear. One wolf is the good wolf and the other one is the bad wolf, and they are contending for your allegiance. Are you going to follow the good wolf or the bad wolf? And the son answers, or doesn't know. And the grandfather sort of says in response that the one that you're going to affect, or the way that's going to win out is the one that you feed. If you feed the good wolf, you'll have goodness. And if you feed the bad wolf, you're going to have badness. And we all have choices that we make from time to time. And those choices determine whether we are leaning one way or the other. And I think it's what Lincoln referred to in his second inaugural address about the better angels of our nature. Are we going to yield to the better nature, angels of our nature, or are we going to yield to the worse, better, less than better, worse angels of our nature? Any other comments from you before we wrap things up?
I really enjoyed both books, and especially the Shantung Compound. I thought he was such a wonderful observer of human nature and able to record it and add humor to it, but then also make us really think about how we want to behave ourselves. I thought it was just a really interesting book.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? I think Kim's joining us now, and I think if I'm not mistaken, you'll be given an opportunity to write an evaluation for this course, and that evaluation will include suggestions for ideas for other courses. If you had a book, for example, I think Phil mentioned a book about that he'd like to discuss sometime, write that down as part of your evaluation for the course. And I enjoyed it myself. It's the second time I taught this, and I was glad to re-examine what I had read from 2007. I think I taught it, so it's been quite some time ago, and times have changed since 2007, and rereading this with another set of eyes and experiences was very helpful for me, and I was glad that you could join me in helping to bring forth some of the insights that we get from these books. Thank you very much for participating in this course.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to jump on and say hi and happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, does anybody know, did they certify at the election in Michigan? Does that happen now at 1 o'clock?
I've
I
been-
haven't seen it. I've been watching my CNN feed. Let me double check.
I've been watching on my iPhone and not found, there's nothing so far.
Yeah.
There,
Oh,
there was an opportunity for people to sign up and make comments, so it might be going on for quite a while.
Okay, Deborah was going to participate in that, so that's where
Oh.
she is. It's,
Cool. Cool.
Yeah,
Well, let's hope so.
yeah.
I hope so. Yeah, we'd hate to have 150,000 votes thrown out.
not gonna happen.
Let's hope so.
I say that like I know, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to use the power of suggestion.
Well, Judy, thank you so much for being such a wonderful leader
Absolutely.
and giving us so much thought, so much to think about.
Yeah, she's a pro.
Thank you. Thank
Yep.
you.
With good
And
choice.
thanks, Bill, for being the coordinator.
Yes.
Yep.
I'm
Thank you,
glad
Bill.
your maiden voyage seemed to go well, so hopefully you'll do it again.
Oh, he's got some courses. He's got some courses up his sleeves too. When things change, we'll get some more courses. And I think, he's got something on the Gospel of Mark, the influence of, was the writer a feminist? Or you can tell us more about that later, Phil.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks again. I think it's got time to say goodbye. Do have a happy Thanksgiving, even though it may be quite different from other Thanksgivings. Do stay safe, stay healthy.
You too, Judy and Bill.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Peace.